在这里，我们的祖先祭祀天地，祈愿风调雨顺，谷物丰收。
The elegant Chinese characters were inspired by the beauty of life in nature. The classical Book of Songs expresses the sincere feelings through describing various beings in the world. The Chinese civilization has always respected and loved nature and valued the harmony between man and nature. Giant pandas are a species from 8 million years ago. China has set up the Giant Panda National Park that covers 27,000 square kilometers of mountain forest. Nearly 2,000 wild pandas are living freely and producing here. Setting eco-red line, building national parks, establishing nature reserves, and keeping a distance from wild species reflect people's willingness to restrain their own behavior and to give way to wild species. The germplasm resource banks and gene banks around the country hold the survival code of millions of species, protecting the valuable assets for humankind. Forest conservation and the holistic conservation and restoration of mountain, river, forest, farmland, lake, grassland, and desert ecosystems are bringing back lucid waters, lush mountains, blue sky, and white clouds.
像保护眼睛一样保护自然和生态环境。这个理念在中国深入人心。在这里，曾经灭绝的麋鹿不但恢复了种群数量，还被成批野化放归大自然。
Thanks to the unremitting efforts by China, many extinct or endangered wild species are regaining confidence and dignity. The elevation of Yunnan varies from 70 meters to 6,700 meters. It's a kingdom of animals and plants. People's efforts to protect biological diversity is speeding up at the moment. China is taking actions to accomplish the mission. Human beings have put forward a proposal to protect the biological diversity and to build a shared future for all life on Earth.
在这里，有一只胸怀世界的小鸟。每年秋季，小小的北京雨燕开始迁飞，一路穿越37个国家，最终抵达南非高原。
For them, the Earth is a whole. The countries they fly across are all homes. No matter they are big or small, powerful or weak, rich or poor. Humans are to coexist harmoniously with nature and all things on Earth. China will work together with the world to protect this planet we call home.
在这里，我们的祖先祭祀天地，祈愿风调雨顺，谷物丰收。
The elegant Chinese characters were inspired by the beauty of life in nature. The classical Book of Songs expresses the sincere feelings through describing various beings in the world. The Chinese civilization has always respected and loved nature and valued the harmony between man and nature. Giant pandas are a species from 8 million years ago. China has set up the Giant Panda National Park that covers 27,000 square kilometers of mountain forest. Nearly 2,000 wild pandas are living freely and producing here. Setting eco-red line, building national parks, establishing nature reserves, and keeping a distance from wild species reflect people's willingness to restrain their own behavior and to give way to wild species. The germplasm resource banks and gene banks around the country hold the survival code of millions of species, protecting the valuable assets for humankind. Forest conservation and the holistic conservation and restoration of mountain, river, forest, farmland, lake, grassland, and desert ecosystems are bringing back lucid waters, lush mountains, blue sky, and white clouds.
像保护眼睛一样保护自然和生态环境。这个理念在中国深入人心。在这里，曾经灭绝的麋鹿不但恢复了种群数量，还被成批野化放归大自然。
Thanks to the unremitting efforts by China, many extinct or endangered wild species are regaining confidence and dignity. The elevation of Yunnan varies from 70 meters to 6,700 meters. It's a kingdom of animals and plants. People's efforts to protect biological diversity is speeding up at the moment. China is taking actions to accomplish the mission. Human beings have put forward a proposal to protect the biological diversity and to build a shared future for all life on Earth.
在这里，有一只胸怀世界的小鸟。每年秋季，小小的北京雨燕开始迁飞，一路穿越37个国家，最终抵达南非高原。
For them, the Earth is a whole. The countries they fly across are all homes. No matter they are big or small, powerful or weak, rich or poor. Humans are to coexist harmoniously with nature and all things on Earth. China will work together with the world.
好，请代表们落座。
Пожалуйста, занимайте ваши места.
尊敬的各位代表，
Уважаемые делегаты,
我们 COP15、COP-MOP 10和 COP-MOP 4
возобновляем совместное
联席会议
пленарное
的全体
заседание
会议，我们现在
СГУ
续会。
10 и 4. Пленарное заседание объявляется
自
открытым.
从周三的开幕式以来啊，
После
我一直在
последней
关注
пленарной сессии
谈判
в
方方面面的
среду,
进展，
я
很高兴
следил
看到
за
大家
процессом
已经完成了大量的
переговоров
工
во
作。
всех аспектах.
可以说啊，
Мне очень приятно видеть,
今
что
天的
большой
盘点
объем
谈
работы
判，
был проделан.
今天的
И справедливо будет
盘点谈判
отметить,
进展情况，
что
特别的
было бы сейчас хорошо
恰当时机。
подвести итог
尊敬的各位代表，在第二次全体
и
会议开始
оценить
前啊，
проделанный прогресс до
考虑
настоящего
到周
этапа.
三开幕的
Прежде
开幕
чем
会
мы
上，
начнем второе
还有
пленарное
部分观察
заседание,
员代表没有获得发言的机会。现在
надо
我想
учесть
请
тот
观
факт,
察员
что
小组
некоторые представители
首先发言。
групп наблюдателей не имели возможности
我要
выступить
提醒
заявлением,
各位发言
поэтому
的
я им предоставлю
代表，
слово. И хочу
请严格把
напомнить
发言的
всем
时间
ораторам,
控制在4分钟以内。首先有请
неукоснительно соблюдать регламент
世界自然联盟代表发言。
4 минуты. Слово
有请。
представителю Международного союза сохранения природы.
You let me know I'm running out of time.
.因为世界自然联盟代表还没有连接上，我们下面的话，请商业组织代表发言，有请，请商业自然联盟代表，请您发言。
Business for Nature, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Owen Bethel, Environmental Impact Lead at Nestle, making this statement on behalf of the Business for Nature Coalition. Businesses have come to COP15 with a clear message, and that is that we need stronger regulation on nature. There will be no economy on a dead planet. Healthy societies, resilient economies, and thriving businesses rely on nature. Governments need to adopt an ambitious global biodiversity framework that provides political certainty and requires businesses to contribute to halting and reversing nature loss this decade. We'd like to make 2 points. Firstly, that voluntary business actions are not enough. So more than 380 business and financial institutions from 52 different countries are asking parties to adopt in Target 15 the mandatory requirement for all businesses and financial institutions to assess and disclose their risks, impacts and dependencies on biodiversity. This must be complemented by a clear aim to globally reduce negative impacts by half and increase positive impacts. Governments need the right information to adopt enabling policies. Investors need the data to realign their financial flows. Consumers need knowledge to make informed choices. Indigenous peoples and local communities need the information to enforce their rights. Businesses' impacts, both positive and negative, need to be recognized, rewarded, or indeed penalized. Leading businesses are asking governments for mandatory assessment and disclosure. We need this to create a level playing field, and the cost of inaction will be substantially higher than action today. Secondly, we ask you to reform environmentally harmful subsidies and incentives by redirecting or eliminating them. Each year, the world spends at least $1.8 trillion financing activities harmful to nature. We're financing our own extinction. Businesses stand ready to work with governments to achieve this. Dear delegates, the business community is asking you for this level of ambition. The business community is telling you that it is indeed feasible. The tools, the methodologies and metrics are available. So what are we waiting for? The time is now and we count on you. Thank you.
好，谢。
Thank you. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the representative of IUCN. Please, you have the floor.
OK。接上没有 ？It's OK。
So we'll go to the next.
好，很抱歉。
Apologies. The representative is still not ready to speak. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the representatives of academic, research, and education organizations. Grantham Institute, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Modesta Abugu, and I and Henry Grob will speak on behalf of the members of major stakeholder group, academia and research, engaged in COP15 in Montreal. We currently have over 150 registered participants. Firstly, we wish to thank the CBD Secretariat for granting our group a dedicated place in this important process and for their invaluable support. Mr. President, we acknowledge that there are many representatives of academia and research participating in these negotiations from a broad range of disciplines, institutions, and regions. Still, more effort is needed to ensure that we can more effectively contribute to this type of multilateral forum. We further recognize the need for enhanced sharing of evidence and knowledge, and the important role of education, research, and science in guiding effective and equitable governance, and the need for an integrated and participatory approach in the preservation and protection of biodiversity.
Mr. President, we believe that the identification of threats to biodiversity and the ways to address those threats must be based on the best available, independent evidence, research, and science. The biodiversity crisis requires urgent and transformative actions. We echo calls from the other major groups for an ambitious framework. We urge the negotiating parties to step up their actions and define targets that are both specific and ambitious, measurable and time-bound to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. We wish to advance long-lasting evidence-based solutions to the urgent biodiversity crisis. Members of academia and research stand ready to provide specific insights and support to parties, policymakers, and other observers. We have come here committed to the process to support a truly transformative global biodiversity framework to be adopted at COP15. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement.
OK，
Now, I'd like to give the floor yet again to the representative of IUCN.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for the issue with the microphone. I make this intervention on behalf of IUCN. We know that humanity is deeply intertwined with nature. Up to 50% of our global GDP is linked to biodiversity. Nevertheless, over a quarter of species assessed on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species face extinction, almost all because of human activities. Even if the biggest losses tend to occur where the biodiversity is greatest, the pattern is the same everywhere. This is not an issue of developing or the developing world. The demise of our natural world affects us all, everywhere. Yet, in the last days, it seems that some of that has been lost amidst square brackets. Colleagues, COP15 offers a unique, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to set a clear path towards a nature-positive society and economy. IUCN calls on parties to agree on a bold, yet practical, post-2020 global biodiversity framework, here in Montreal and the means to achieve it. We recognize there are challenges and much more progress is needed. When the gavel falls to close this COP, we need to have secure a global plan to halt and reverse the biodiversity loss. This simply cannot wait any longer. The perfect cannot be the enemy of the good. To overcome the current impasse, we will have to find a middle way, and importantly, all voices must be heard. A true spirit of compromise and of inclusiveness must prevail. So parties, let's make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam, for your statement. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the representative of a number of non-governmental organizations. First, I'd like to give the floor to the representative of BirdLife International.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of BirdLife, CI, Campaign for Nature, NABU, Panthera, RSPB, TNC, WCS, WWF, and ZSL. We were called to action by Secretary General Guterres at the opening ceremony. He asked this conference to stop the orgy of destruction of nature. We are grateful to parties for their intense efforts over the past 3 days to get down to work, but we are not there yet, not even close. Critical issues remain unresolved, so we would like to remind parties that the GBF must include these pillars: a mission to halt and reverse biodiversity loss to be nature positive by 2030, with more nature at the end of the decade than at its start. This must be supported by ambitious, specific, and measurable outcome-oriented goals, including a commitment to halt and recover species loss and retain and restore ecosystems under Goal A. A global target to protect and conserve at least 30% of the world's lands and ocean by 2030, emphasizing the retention and restoration of ecological integrity and key areas for biodiversity, and ensuring effectiveness, connectivity, equitable management, and the rights and contributions of indigenous peoples and local communities. Clear language to curb the economic drivers of nature loss and ensure sustainable use. We need a commitment to halve the footprint of production and consumption by 2030 and halt land and sea use chains underpinned by targets that transform the productive sectors that drive biodiversity loss. A comprehensive resource mobilization package to implement the global biodiversity framework and to stop funding the destruction of nature and invest in a nature-positive world, including by ending and redirecting environmentally harmful subsidies and fair and ambitious finance targets. There must be a substantial increase in new international biodiversity finance from all sources, including from developed nations to low and middle income countries. A strong implement mechanism. We are extremely concerned that negotiations on mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reporting, and review are pointing towards postponing key elements to a later COP and an incomplete mechanism that would repeat the failure of Aichi. We especially need parties to deliver a clear signal that action will be increased over time if implementation is not on track. In the UN Secretary General's word, we must stop humanity from being a weapon of mass extinction. Future generations will condemn us for wasting this last critical chance. We have just days left to secure an ambitious peace pact with nature. After 4 years of hard work, there is no excuse to leave Montreal without an ambitious, truly transformative and inclusive global biodiversity framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the representative of small farmers, Ms. Tammy Erlin Yunus of International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I acknowledge we are meeting on the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. I represent small-scale food producers as a member of the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty, and I myself am a small-scale farmer from the unceded lands of the Jara, to whose elders past and present I pay my respects, and I also pay my respects to all Indigenous peoples here. Here you debate agroecology. On our farm, we practice agroecology. In our diverse paddock-to-paddock degrowth approach, we raise heritage breed livestock on diverse pastures that are spongy and alive with mycorrhizae and rich in carbon. Like hundreds of millions of other smallholders and indigenous peoples around the world, we live a life in harmony with nature, our Mother Earth. In our role as custodians, we conserve and sustainably use the biodiversity in our care. And as non-Indigenous Australians, we share the benefits of our use by paying a percentage of our income to local First Peoples. This is the first biodiversity COP since the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants was ratified, and small-scale food producers should be respected as rights holders by referencing UN DROP alongside UN DRIP in the new Global Biodiversity Framework and the CBD. Every time those in power fail to uphold the human and collective rights of the best custodians of biodiversity, you fail to uphold your duty to protect biodiversity. We sit in these meetings of people of the land, for the land, listening to so-called debates about land and life, wondering what will happen if you continue to separate people from nature with false solutions. What is nature to each of you here? Some propose DSI to save biodiversity as if you can just dematerialize our mother and piece her back together and hope she functions better. Turning nature into capital is anything but living in harmony with nature. The nature-based solutions debated here and at the climate COP put nature on a ledger and then sell her to polluters at the expense of biodiversity, land, and the rights of Indigenous peoples, small-scale food producers, and local communities. We sit in these rooms bearing grim witness to the greed of a handful of big exporting countries and their corporations who seek to destroy 30 years of multilateral agreements. It's easy to see why the most powerful and least accountable prefer to set targets towards a so-called nature-positive world than to talk about Mother Earth. You don't need to lock land away from her careful custodians as proposed in the 30-30 target. You need to protect her from corporate and state greed. We heard a hard truth on Monday from a member of the African group who said if we had just acted on what we agreed to at the beginning of the convention, we wouldn't have the biodiversity crisis that we are in. We're not here to renegotiate the convention, he said. So we ask you to stop playing games with brackets and meaningless phrases and do your jobs like Mother told you.
Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the representative of the finance sector. Font Action, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Finance for Biodiversity Foundation, representing 111 financial institutions committed to action on biodiversity. This is the first time that so many financial institutions are mobilizing around the CBD process. A new COP15 statement from private finance will be launched on December 13th. Now is the time to capture all the positive momentum and translate it into an ambitious global biodiversity framework that will represent a turning point for the financial sector's relationship with nature. We've been honored to be involved in the working groups and contribute to the development of the GBF over the past year and a half. At this point, we encourage parties to stay laser-focused on getting the GBF over the line. The alignment of all financial flows goes beyond the important question of funding nature conservation. We need to reduce the financing of and investment in companies and activities that are causing significant harm to biodiversity. Therefore, it is essential that the following few points get confirmed. First, we call on all parties to commit in Goal D to the alignment of public and private financial flows with the post-2020 GBF rather than with the 2050 vision. This is critical for effective implementation in the short and medium term. Second, that Target 14 retains a clear enabling environment for the alignment of all financial flows. Third, that Target 15 requires mandatory disclosure of impacts and dependencies for businesses that have significant impacts on biodiversity. References to reducing negative and increasing positive impact are crucial. Soon after, attention will turn to implementation. We look forward to contributing to global efforts to protect the ecosystems our economies and societies depend on and support the implementation of the GBF. Thank you.
I thank you for the statement. I now give the floor to the Office of the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I speak on behalf of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights when I wish you all a happy Human Rights Day. Today is a day to celebrate all human rights, but it's also a day to take stock of how far we have to go to realize the collective vision of human rights and lives of human dignity for all. I want to speak of one right in particular. Earlier this year, the UN General Assembly recognized the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. The resolution 76/300 emphasized the important relationship between the right to a healthy environment and multilateral environmental agreements. According to the IPBES Values Report, a rights-based approach, including meaningful and informed participation, is essential for effective environmental action. In turn, biodiversity is necessary for the enjoyment of a wide range of human rights, including the rights to life, health, food, water, culture, and a healthy environment. This is why the High Commissioner for Human Rights has called for a biodiversity framework with human rights, including the right to a healthy environment, at its core. The right to a healthy environment brings together key elements of international human rights law and international environmental law under a common umbrella, emphasizing the interdependence of people and nature. As such, it's a critical tool for harmonizing the relationship between people and nature, without which the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will not succeed. Human rights and related principles need to be meaningfully reflected, not just in the guiding principles or the chapeau of the framework, but in the goals, targets, and indicators that will be monitored, reviewed, and acted upon. It's imperative that this framework respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. In an open letter issued last week, the High Commissioner for Human Rights outlined 7 key elements of a rights-based approach to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework as follows. The right to a healthy environment. It belongs in Goal B, and the decision to adopt the framework, and at the heart of this process, accountability for businesses, and Target 15, meaningful and informed participation and access to justice and protection of environmental human rights defenders, and Target 21, the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities to their knowledge, lands, resources, and territories, Targets 1, 3, 20, and others, gender equality, and Target 21, but throughout the framework, a human rights enhancing economy that mobilizes resources for a healthy environment and healthy people. Targets 18 and 19.2, rights-based monitoring and implementation. In the monitoring framework and in the actions you take to implement that framework in national biodiversity strategies and action plans. I urge you to act on these priorities and integrate human rights throughout the post-2020 framework, so that we will have a framework that truly protects people and planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. I now would like to give the floor to the representative from Ghana, Eric Okri. Mr. Okri, I would like to give you the floor to speak on behalf of the Credential Committee.
Mr. President, on behalf of the Bureau, I am pleased to make the following report on the credentials of representatives to the second part of COP15, COP 10, and COP 4. On the COP15, Mr. President, a total of 179 contracting parties to the convention are registered as attending COP15. The Bureau examined the documents or credentials submitted by the representatives of 136 contracting parties. The credentials of representatives of 114 parties were in full compliance with Rule 18 of the Rules of Procedure. Credentials of the representatives of 19 parties to the CBD were not fully in compliance with the requirements of Rule 18, and representatives of 43 parties who are registered as attending COP15 have not submitted credentials. On the Cartagena Protocol COP, Mr. President, a total of 161 contracting parties to the protocol are registered as attending the second part of COP 10. The Bureau examined the documents or credentials submitted by the representatives of 122 parties to the protocol. The credentials of representatives of 103 parties were in full compliance with Rule 18 of the Rules of Procedure. Credentials of representatives of 17 parties to the protocol were not fully compliant with the Rule 18. Representatives of 39 parties who are registered as attending COP 10 of the Cartagena Protocol have not submitted credentials. On the Nagoya Protocol, Mr. President, a total of 131 contracting parties to the protocol are registered as attending the second part of the COP 4. The Bureau examined documents or credentials submitted by the representatives of 100 parties to the protocol. The credentials of representatives of 84 parties were in full compliance with Rule 18 of the Rules of Procedure. Credentials of representatives of 16 parties were not fully compliant with the requirements of Rule 18, and representatives of 31 parties who are registered as attending COP 4 of the Nagoya Protocol have not submitted credentials. Mr. President, on behalf of the Bureau, I would also like to inform the parties of the Bureau's decision to defer the credentials of a party and to accredit no delegate from that party due to the submission of competing credentials. Representatives of parties to the convention, the Cartagena Protocol, and Nagoya Protocol are reminded to please submit their credentials in full compliance with Rule 18. Credentials must be sent to the Secretariat by email no later than 5 p.m. Montreal time on 16 December 2022. To enable the final review of credentials and reporting by the Bureau to the meeting of the COP and the COP MOPs. I would like to take this opportunity to remind delegations to submit credentials that clearly state the individuals listed the individuals listed in the instruments are duly appointed, authorized, empowered to represent the country in the meetings. They must be signed by the head of state, the head of government, or Minister of Foreign Affairs. Finally, Mr. President, credentials must be presented or mailed to the Secretariat in their original version. Samples or templates of the credentials are made available on the Secretariat website. In the coming days, Mr. President, the Secretariat will also issue an information document on the status of credentials. The document will contain the list of parties that submitted credential that is in full compliance with Rule 18 of the Rules of Procedure. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, Mr. Okri, for your report. I'm pleased to see that more than 2/3 of the parties present have presented valid credentials. However, it is concerning that a number of parties have not provided valid credentials for their delegations. I therefore urge the remaining parties to submit their credentials as soon as possible to enable them to participate in the decision-making process of the conference. Now let's go back to the second item of the agenda, that is to elect officers other than the President who will serve on the next Bureau, as well as the election of the chairs of SUBSTA and the chair of SBI. Yes. You may recall that on Wednesday at the plenary, we deferred the elections to today's plenary in order to allow regions to conduct consultations. I have, however, been advised that regions are not yet in a position to provide the nominations. Therefore, the election of the officers for the next Bureau, as well as the election of the chairs of SUBSTA and SBI, will be taken up on December 19th. That is next Monday, the final plenary of our meeting as the first part of that meeting. I also would like to remind delegates that the COPMOPs will each elect substitutes as necessary for those members of the Bureau that represent the party to the convention but are not party to the protocol. Now, dear delegates, I now return to the election of the members of the Compliance Committee of the Cartagena and Nagoya protocols. At the plenary, the first plenary held on Wednesday, delegates were reminded that each COPMOP is expected to elect members of the Compliance committees. The COPMOP 4 is also expected to elect 2 observers from indigenous peoples and local communities. I have been informed that the regions are not yet in a position to provide their nominations. Therefore, the elections of the Compliance Committee members will also take place at the first part of the final plenary on Monday, December 19th. It will be the first part of the meeting on that day, on Monday. Delegates may also recall that on Wednesday, we took up the issue of the date and venue of the future meetings. I will now continue the consideration of that particular agenda item. You may recall that on Wednesday, it was agreed that Turkey will host the COP16. Following the consultation with the Bureau, I believe that we can all agree that COP16 should be held in 2024, in the second half of that year. I would now like to give the floor to Turkey as the host country of COP16. Turkey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's an honor to address this plenary on behalf of the Republic of Turkey as the host of COP16. Our planning is to hold the 16th COP in Turkey in the last quarter of 2024. Turkish Minister of Agriculture and Forestry will be attending DHLS next week and will share information on the matter. Using this opportunity, I would like to express that we hope the new global biodiversity framework aimed to be adopted here would be a critical tool to reverse the declining trend of biodiversity loss. Learning from the Aichi targets, Turkey supports realistic, achievable, timely, and balanced targets. The outcome of this meeting will also guide us during our preparations. Turkey attaches utmost importance to the conservation and sustainable use of land and marine biological diversity. We have been supporting all international and regional efforts to this end. In this regard, we believe that hosting the next COP is a great opportunity to make a valuable contribution to the future of UN CBD. We will work ambitiously and sincerely, paying particular attention to inclusiveness, to organize a successful and fruitful conference of parties. We are grateful for the valuable support of the Secretariat, and we are looking forward to working in close cooperation with all parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to you for your statement. I believe that I speak on behalf of everyone here that we look forward very much to visiting your beautiful country in 2024. Dear delegates, as was noted on Wednesday at the plenary on that day, we also pointed out that COP17 would be due to be hosted by a country from the CEE region. However, I understand that region has not yet come to an agreed position with regard to the proposed host country. Therefore, we will allow more time to the region so that they can engage in consultations as to who is going to host the COP17. Now we go to the reports from the chairs of the working groups. I would like to give the floor to the chairs of the working groups to report on the progress of the consultation taking place within their different working groups. First of all, I give the floor to Ms. Rosemary Patterson of New Zealand to report on the progress in Working Group 1. Ms. Patterson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished delegates, I'm happy to update the delegates on the progress made by Working Group 1 in the past 3 days. Working Group 1 met on 7 December Wednesday from 3 to 5:05 p.m. and on 9 December Friday from 10 a.m. to 1:20 p.m. All items of the COP15 agenda under the responsibility of Working Group 1, including 2 joint items also on the agenda of the meeting of the parties to the Nagoya Protocol, were considered at our first meeting on 7 December. In line with the proposed organisation of work, the working group agreed that I would directly prepare conference room papers for items with only a few unresolved issues, with informal consultations with relevant parties where necessary. For items with many or complex unresolved issues, indicated by square brackets, the working group established a contact group immediately with a view to preparing a consensus text for transmission to the working group as a CRP. The working group at its second session yesterday approved the CRPs on 8A, on informing the scientific and technical evidence base for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, 8B, on review of progress in the implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020, and the achievement of the Aichi biodiversity targets. 10A, on development of a new program of work and institutional arrangements on Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention related to Indigenous peoples and local communities. 10B on the in-depth dialogue on the thematic areas and other cross-cutting issues, and on item 10C on the recommendations from the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues to the Convention on Biological Diversity. I also prepared a CRP on item 9D on a gender plan of action, which we will come back to at our next meeting. Further, I am in the process of preparing CRPs on items 9C, 13C on communication, and item 16B on engagement with subnational governments, cities, and other local authorities. Turning now to the Friends of the Chair and contact groups. On item 9A on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the contact group, co-chaired by Francis Ogwal of Uganda and Basile Van Havre of Canada, met during the afternoon and evening of Thursday, 8 December, and again yesterday afternoon and evening. The group was mandated to go through the entire framework, focusing on resolving bracketed text without adding new text. In the first session, quick progress was made in deleting some brackets and streamlining text in sections A and B, and continued with section B bis until paragraph 12. In the second session, the contact group made progress on a number of paragraphs as mandated, with the inputs from small groups. Sections B bis, C, D, and E were completed. Many brackets were lifted, but several paragraphs remained in brackets and needed to be taken up again. Many interventions were heard on section B bis, which helped to make progress in the text. 5 small informal drafting groups were established and helped improve the text in section B bis. The contact group will meet again this evening. Item 9B on the monitoring framework met as a Friends of the Chair group, facilitated by Substa Chair Hezekiah Benitez, on Thursday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and was well attended. The key outcome of the session was that the main decision text is bracket-free and is now posted as a non-paper. The only brackets are those that refer to Annex 1 on the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, but those brackets can be dropped as soon as Annex 1 is agreed. Parties do not wish to discuss Annex 2, the terms of reference for an RTEG, until after a discussion on the indicators, particularly the headline indicators. In consultation with the Bureau this morning, I have extended the terms of reference of this group to continue their discussion on the indicators in the annex, and I have asked Anne Teller of the European Union to co-facilitate with Mr. Benitez. On CBD item 11 and item 14 under the Nagoya Protocol, the meeting of the contact group, co-chaired by Letitia Chitwamulamuni of South Africa and Gauta Voigt Hansen of Norway, took place from 10 a.m. to noon on Thursday, and again as a Friends of the Chair on Friday evening at 7:30, with the mandate of finalising the draft decision on digital sequencing information for the COP. The group heard general comments from many parties, non-parties, Indigenous peoples and local communities, and stakeholders on OEG Recommendation 5/2. There was agreement that the DSI discussion had progressed over the past 4 years, though there were still divergent views about where to go from here. The co-chairs asked for ideas on an approach that will lead to an agreement on benefit sharing on DSI, and heard a round of comments, and thereafter established a Friends of the Co-Chairs group, facilitated by William Lockhart of the UK, Mfatso Kalemba of Malawi, to prepare to discuss elements of capacity building, technology transfer, and scientific and technical cooperation to discuss at the next meeting of the Friends. A revised paragraph 11, which contains the various possible approaches to a solution, reflecting the comments and reflections heard in the group, was prepared for their consideration at their next meeting, which took place last night. On item 12A, resource mobilisation, the contact group co-chaired by Ms. Ines Vallée from Belgium and Mr. Shonosani Munzedzi from South Africa has met twice, on 7 December and 8 December, between 7:30 and 10:30 p.m. It was mandated to finalise the draft decision on resource mobilisation contained in SBI 3 Recommendation 6. Due to the length of the draft decision and the volume of text that was not considered by SBI, it was decided to analyse the most important sections of the draft decision in blocks and using guiding questions instead of proceeding paragraph by paragraph. During the first meeting, they considered the successor to the current strategy for resource mobilisation and discussed the possibility of applying a phased approach to its development, with the first phase to be implemented between 2022 and 2024. There was wide support for this approach. During the second meeting, parties engaged in a rich, in-depth exchange of views on 3 framing questions. Parties agreed that access to funding is one of the biggest challenges being faced in biodiversity resource mobilisation. Parties disagreed on how best to address this challenge, considering the role of the GEF and the need for new instruments. The co-chairs are developing a non-paper for discussion in the next session. On item 13A, capacity building and development and technical and scientific cooperation, the contact group co-chaired by Hayo Hanstra of the Netherlands and Laura Bermudez of Colombia met from 3 to 6:30 p.m. on Thursday and this morning from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. The session began with Section B on technical and scientific cooperation, which included new text that emerged from the intersessional work. The contact group managed to go through the entire Annex 3 and lifted most of the brackets, with only 2 sets of brackets remaining to be resolved. The contact group then moved on to paragraph 29 that deals with the options for institutional mechanisms for promoting and facilitating technical and scientific cooperation. There were divergent views regarding the preferred option, with the majority leaning towards hybrid mechanisms. In view of the divergence of views, a group of friends of the co-chairs was established, facilitated by Simon Ndibnu Patamakan Amek from Cameroon and Ari-Pekka Alvian from Finland. It met on Friday afternoon from 1:15 to 2:45 and will report back to the contact group at its next session. The discussion then turned to Section A of the decision on capacity building and development and managed to address a number of paragraphs. The contact group agreed to discuss paragraph 7 alongside paragraph 11 with a view to merge them. On item 14, mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reporting and review, the contact group, co-chaired by Gillian Guthrie of Jamaica and Andrew Stott of the UK, met on Wednesday, 7 December from 7:30 to 11:30 p.m. and again on Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. and this morning from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. During the first contact group session, the annexes to the decision on monitoring, review and reporting were discussed. The following conclusions were made. Parties supported Annex 1 on the NBSAP guidance and stressed its importance for the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. A revised version of the annex will be released in a non-paper. Parties expressed general support for the structure of Annex 2, which includes the national reporting template for the 7th and 8th report. A revised version of the annex will be released in a non-paper. Regarding Annex 3, parties prefer to further pilot the SBI open-ended forum and discuss it at COP16 and not consider the annex at this COP. On Annex 4, parties would like to include it in the COP15 decision on this item if time permits, but it was not discussed during the session. Progress was made in cleaning up some of the brackets in the text. However, time constraints prevented them from looking at the decision text, and thus this was to be continued. Mr. President, As you have heard, delegates have worked tirelessly over the past 3 days and made considerable progress. I wish to express my sincere appreciation to all the co-chairs, the members of the contact groups, and friends of the co-chairs for their hard work and dedication, and the members of the COP Bureau for their guidance, and to the Secretariat. We plan to make further progress as much as possible before the next plenary, including by working on Monday. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the Working Group 2 Chair, Ms. Helena Jeffrey Brown from Antigua and Barbuda. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Working Group 2 has convened 6 sessions since it was established and has met daily to advance the extensive work program allocated to us. The atmosphere in the working group has been positive and has allowed us to address 32 items, with 18 of them being advanced to L papers for the consideration of plenary today. All items of the COP15 agenda and the Cartagena Protocol MOP 10 agenda under the responsibility of Working Group 2 were considered, and we have also made significant progress on those elements of Nagoya Protocol MOP 4 that were allocated to us. In line with the organization of work, the working group agreed to the following approach. For items with only a few unresolved issues, to directly prepare conference room papers with informal consultations with relevant parties where necessary. For items with many or complex unresolved issues indicated by square brackets, to establish a contact group immediately with a view to preparing a consensus text for transmission to the working group as a CRP. Only for items that have not been through a subsidiary body process, which was primarily the case for agenda items under the 2 protocols, first readings were conducted. We worked diligently and made significant progress. As a result, the working group has completed its consideration of the following items. COP Item 22 on Sustainable Wildlife Management, COP Item 17, the Review of Effectiveness, COP Item 26, Nature and Culture. With respect to the Cartagena Protocol items, they are CP Item 8, Monitoring Reporting, CP Item 9, Assessment and Review, CP Item 5, Compliance, CP Item 16, Socioeconomic Considerations, CP Item 17, Supplementary Protocol, CP Item 11, Biosafety Clearinghouse, CP Item 15, Detection and Identification of LMOs, CP Item 14, Risk Assessment, CP Item 13, Review of Effectiveness, then the Nagoya Protocol items, NP Item 10, Monitoring and Reporting, NP Item 9, ABS Clearinghouse, NP Item 8, Capacity Building, NP Item 7, Financial Mechanism, NP Item 5, Compliance, NP Item 12, Review of Effectiveness. I'm pleased to report that L documents on all these agenda items are available for consideration by today's plenary. I have established a few contact groups that are working on advancing a number of important items. These contact groups are as follows. With respect to contact group on CP Item 7, this is chaired by Rigobert Enteb from Cameroon and Rita Andorko of Hungary. The first meeting of the group was on Friday evening, and the working group heard a report this morning and was pleased to hear the good spirit in the room and the progress made. The contact group met a second time at the end of this meeting, and the working group will hear a report on the progress made at its next session. The contact group on COP Item 20, Marine and Coastal Biodiversity, was chaired by Marie-May Jeremy of Seychelles and René Sauvé of Canada. This contact group is addressing both parts, A.2 and B of this item. The contact group considered non-papers for these 2 parts of this item, They have been working hard and are making steady progress and are due to finalize their work this evening. COP item 27 on agriculture. This contact group is co-chaired by Mr. Hendrik Segers of Belgium and Mr. Eric Okuri of Ghana. Considerable progress was made and the vast majority of the square brackets were resolved. Only one bracket remains in the plan of action and 3 square brackets in the decision. I hope to take up the CRP at the next session of our working group. With respect to COP27 Synthetic Biology Contact Group, co-chaired by Ntakazeni Shisada of South Africa and Werner Schenkel of Germany. This group made good progress in resolving the issue of periodicity of horizon scanning process, as well as on agreeing that an ATEG should be the body doing the assessment part of the process. As there was no consensus on how to resolve Section A on new and emerging issues, the co-chairs proposed to those parties with strong views on this to discuss and propose a compromise text that should be submitted to the contact group before its next session to be held next week. The contact group on CP item 14 on risk assessment, chaired by Takazeni Shisada of South Africa and Werner Schenkel of Germany, the contact group met and was able to address the outstanding elements and advance a clean text to the working group on the future work program on risk assessment. With respect to COP15A IPBES work program of work, a non-paper has been published and the contact group will meet for the first time this evening. In addition, I have established Friends of the Chair groups for the following items. COP27 Invasive Alien Species, kindly facilitated by Ms. Senka Barudanovic of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This group met this morning and have completed their work. COP23 on biodiversity and climate change, kindly facilitated by Mr. Sigurdur Svensson of Iceland. This group discussed 7 out of the 9 paragraphs in brackets. Brackets were lifted in 2 of the 7 paragraphs discussed. The Friends of the Chair was not able to complete their work and issues remain. Additional time will be made available next week to advance these discussions. Regarding NP MOP 15, item 15 on specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments, these friends are yet to meet as they are also involved in the DSI in discussions. Following my attempt to do informal consultations on the COP item 25 on biodiversity and health, I've decided to rather request a Friends of Chair group to be facilitated by Mr. Andrew Rhodes of Mexico and Ms. Barbara Engels from Germany to assist me to develop a draft CRP based on the SAPSTA recommendations. The group will meet next week. I would like to thank the members of my working group 2 and all of the co-chairs for their exceedingly great work and spirit of compromise. This is the end of my report. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Now I'd like to invite the chair of the Budget Contact Group, Mr. Hamdallah Zeden from Egypt, to give us an update on the work of their contact group. Mr. Zeden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm pleased to report on the work of the Budget Group. The Budget Group held 3 meetings, 2 meetings on the 8th of December and 1 meeting yesterday. Following presentations by the Secretariat on the 8th of December, the contact group considered the report of the Executive Secretary on the income and the budget performance for the biennium 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. The preliminary analysis of the Secretariat and the staffing of the Secretariat in view of the orientation of activities under the Convention and its protocols, and the UN audit observations and recommendations. as well as the proposed budget for the program of work for the biennium 2023-2024. During the first meeting, a number of parties sought clarification and/or additional information on a number of issues. These were provided by the Secretariat during the afternoon session of the first day. The third meeting of the budget group was convened yesterday. As requested by the group at its first session, the Secretariat presented a list of staff requirements for the zero real growth scenario, including 8 posts, of which currently funded, 6 of which currently funded from extra budgetary voluntary contributions, with priorities and the justification for conversion to the budget, the core budget. Discussion was then held on staffing needs of the Secretariat, including priorities of parties, and some parties expressed their interests in the Global Biodiversity Framework-related posts. Some concerns were raised regarding administrative capacity of the Secretariat and organizational risks. Parties then continued to consider the major budget items. There was progress on several budget items and the agreement on the following budget items: general temporary assistance, consultants, rent and associated costs, translation of the clearinghouse mechanisms website, information technology infrastructure, and the general operating expenses. There was provisional agreement on bureau meetings and expert meetings, pending some information from the Secretariat. It should be noted, however, that staffing requirements may increase following the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework and as a result of COP15 decisions. Finally, Mr. President, the next budget meeting, the group will reconvene on Monday, and meeting costs will be discussed. I would like to express my appreciation to all those who participated in the meeting for their good spirit and compromise and for progress made, and to the Secretariat for its incredible support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Zidane, for your report. I would like to once again thank the chairs and thank you, dear delegates. I thank you for the hard work carried out in the working groups and in the contact groups. I now declare the adjournment of the joint plenary and now declare the resumption of the COP15 meeting. Dear delegates, taking into account of the heavy agenda of COP15 and the concurrent organization of COP-MOP 10 to the Cartagena Protocol and COP-MOP 4 to the Nagoya Protocol, I would like to propose to look at the L documents that are ready and consider them for adoption at this plenary meeting this afternoon. We will start with the L document under the COP and then proceed with the L documents under the 2 COP-MOPs. Under the convention, I now put forward the following L documents for your consideration. L3, on informing the scientific and technological evidence based on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. L4, on review of progress in the implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020. L5, on sustainable wildlife management. L6, on the in-depth dialogue on the thematic area and other cross-cutting issues. L7, on recommendations from the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues to the Convention of Biodiversity. L8 on development of the new program of work and institution arrangement on Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention related to indigenous peoples and local communities. L9 on review of the effectiveness of the structures and processes under CBD and its protocols, and L10 on nature and culture. I propose that we start our consideration of L3 on informing the scientific and technological evidence base for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, that is CBD-COP COP 15/L.3. I submit this for your consideration and adoption. I would like to remind you that the document has already been approved in the working group. Can we adopt this document as a whole? I would like to see if there are any objections. I give the floor to Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Indonesia highlights the importance of a technical and scientific base for the effectively implementing the post-2020 GBF, and we welcome the publication of the 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook, including its summary for policymakers. However, we still have concerns about the reference to the 2nd editions of the Local Biodiversity Outlook. This document reported a case study of the criminalizations of a Dayak community in East Kalimantan. I have to inform this meeting that much progress has been happening since the case came to the public attention in 2014. There was a reconciliations meeting on September 2016 facilitated by the local government, which resulted in the halting of logging operations of the company. The local government also mediated a dispute between the two local communities over the management of the forest. Unfortunately, these two factual signs of progress are not reported in this case study, which makes the case study distorted and incomplete and may lead to a false conclusion that only serves certain parties' interests. Therefore, I urge the Forest People Program to update and reflect on this factual progress in their report. I want this statement to be recorded in this meeting that Indonesia cannot consider the Local Biodiversity Outlook and its summary of recommendations until this issue has been resolved. We will submit our intervention to the Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. We have taken note of your statement and your concerns with regard to that particular report. We have taken note of your statement. I would like to see if there are other delegates that seek the floor. If not, in that case, then we adopt this particular L document. Next, we'll go to L4, which is the review of progress in the implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 and achievements of the Aichi biodiversity targets, CBD-COP-15/L4. I submit this for your consideration. May I remind you, delegates, that this document has been considered at the working group and has been adopted by the working group. Can we adopt? I don't see any objections. This L document is adopted. We now take a look at L5, which is on sustainable wildlife management. It is CBD-COP-15/L5. Once again, this document has been considered and adopted at the working group level. Can we adopt L5? I don't see any objections. It is thus adopted. Oh, I now see that there is someone. There's a delegate from the one of the conventions that seeks the floor. CITES, probably.
Distinguished delegates, I have the honor to address this plenary on behalf of the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management, or CPW, in my capacity as its chair. We express our deep appreciation to the chair of Working Group 2 for submitting the draft decision to the plenary. The adoption of this decision recognizes that sustainable use of biodiversity, including management of wildlife, contributes to progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals and is relevant for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This decision is important to keep the momentum and continue the important work on sustainable wildlife management that can significantly contribute to biodiversity conservation. We believe that the CPW's collaboration among its partners over the past years has laid a fertile foundation to continue the work mandated in Decision 14.7, and furthermore to support the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In particular, we are glad that the outcomes of the CPW's consultative workshop on sustainable wildlife management beyond 2020 helped inform the discussions in the development of the targets to reduce threats to biodiversity, as well as the targets on meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing. We anticipate that this work will continue to be useful in informing the ongoing discussions around the indicators for these targets. We also wish to inform the parties about the CPW Progress Report, CBD-Live, which provides a synopsis of CPW's work over the past 4 years in response to the request called for in Decision 14.7. Finally, we are preparing to meet the new sustainable wildlife management challenges that lie ahead with the adoption of a new set of CPW thematic objectives. Together, we bring rich expertise and technical knowledge that will directly contribute to the implementation of both the decision on sustainable wildlife management and also the ambitious targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. To conclude, we stress our willingness to continue discussions on relevant wildlife-related topics, and we are here at COP15 to provide support for the finalization of post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We wish all delegates very successful negotiations. Thank you, Chair.
I thank you for your statement, and I thank you speaking on behalf of the CPW. I thank you for the remarks. I'd like to see if there are others who would like to seek the floor. If not, then we consider this L document adopted. I now invite you to consider document L7, which is on the recommendation from the UN PFII on the to the Convention of Biodiversity, document number CBD-COP-15/L7. May I remind you, delegates, that this document has been adopted by the working group. Any objections? If not, then this is adopted. Thank you. I now go to document L8, which is on the development of a new program of work and institutional arrangement on Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention related to the indigenous peoples and local communities. That is CBD-COP-15/L.8. I submit this for your consideration and adoption. May I remind you also that this document has been discussed and adopted by the working group. Any objections? If not, this is adopted. I now give the floor to the IFB, representative of IFB, to take the floor.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. I'm talking on behalf of the IFB. The document is very important
Likewise, it is critical that immediate and effective measures be taken to halt and turn the tide on biodiversity loss, and for progress to be made with the implementation of Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention linked to indigenous peoples, bearing in mind that our peoples are fundamental actors in caring for nature and biodiversity. For the implementation of these decisions, we request that all necessary provisions be made, including sufficient financial resources, to make effective the in-person meeting of the special technical group of experts on indigenous peoples and local communities to provide advice on the drafting of a new program of work and institutional arrangements for Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention. We ask that the voluntary fund be equipped with sufficient resources so as to guarantee broad-based participation from indigenous peoples in the next meeting of the special open-ended working group on Article 8J and its connected provisions. We hope that the rights and full and effective participation of indigenous peoples be guaranteed throughout the process of drafting and implementation of the new program of work, and for new institutional arrangements linked to Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention at every level. This new program will make a significant contribution to the implementation of the new post-2020 framework. Turning to the gender plan, as Indigenous women, we expect that the measures defined will be implemented with a cultural-specific approach and that our full and effective participation will be guaranteed, bearing in mind our close relationship to nature and culture. Finally, the conservation of biological diversity must take place in all territories and ecosystems with the participation of Indigenous peoples, including women, youth, and Indigenous women, youth, and girls. We have a major commitment as the Earth is our mother and humankind's common home. Thank you very much, Chair.
I thank you for your remarks. My apologies when we adopted L6. I did not read out the full name of L6. Let me read that once again. It's about launching in-depth dialogue on these thematic areas and other cross-cutting issues. That document was already adopted. Now we'll review L9, namely CBD stroke L29, and I want to draw your attention that it also has been adopted by the working group. Do you also still have any objection to this document? If none, it's adopted. Now we'll review L10, nature and culture. Similarly, it was also adopted by the working group in its proceedings. Is there any objection? If none, it's adopted. I declare close the 15th COP15. Now let's resume the meeting of COP MOP 10. We will now consider the L documents that are ready. But under the COP MOP 10 of the Cartagena Protocol, and I'll put forward the following L documents: 1, is L3 on report of the Compliance Committee, L4 on monitoring and reporting, L5 on the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on Liability and Redress, L6 on Socio-Economic Considerations, L7 on operation and activities on the Biodiversity Clearinghouse, L8 on risk assessment and risk management, L9 on assessment and review of the effectiveness of the protocol, and final evaluation of the strategic plan for the Cartagena protocol on biosafety for the period 2011 to 2020. L10 on detection and identification of living modified organisms. L11 on review of effectiveness of structures and procedures under the CBD and its protocols. Now, we will review them one by one. I propose that we start our consideration of L3 on the report of the Compliance Committee, and I draw your attention to the fact that the meeting was also adopted by the working group. Is there still any objection? If none, it is adopted. Now we'll turn to L4. On monitoring and reporting. Regarding this document, may I also draw your attention to the fact that it was also adopted by the working group. Is there any new comment? If none, it's adopted. Now, let's turn to L5 on the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on Liability and Redress, that is CBD-CP MOP stroke CBD stroke CP stroke MOP stroke 10 stroke L5. It has been adopted by the working group in this review. Is there any further comment or objection? I see none. It's adopted. Now let's turn to L6 on socio-economic considerations as contained in CBD stroke CP stroke MOP stroke 10 stroke L6. I should also draw attention to the fact that it was adopted by the working group. Is there any further comment? If none, it's adopted. Now let's review L7 on operation and activities of the Biodiversity Clearinghouse, namely CBD stroke CP stroke MOP stroke 10 stroke L7. And this document was also adopted by the working group in this review. Is there any further comment? If none, it's adopted. Now let's turn to L8 on risk assessment and risk management, namely CBD stroke CP stroke MOP stroke 10 stroke L8. And I also want to draw your attention that the paper was adopted by the working group. Any further comment? If none, it's adopted. Now let's turn to L9 on assessment and review of the effectiveness of the protocol and final evaluation of the strategic plan for the Cartagena protocol on biosafety for the period 2011 to 2020, namely CBD stroke CP stroke MOP stroke 10 stroke L9. Any further comment? As it has been adopted by the working group. I have noted there is someone asking for the floor. I give the floor to the representative of Czechia.
On behalf of the EU and its 27 member states, we have only minor editorial point here. In paragraph 9 of part A, is missing an asterisk next to the word human, so that everybody knows what the footnote refers to. Thank you.
I thank you for your intervention and for reminding us. We will note it down and make the necessary correction. Any other comment? So we will reflect the suggestion by the representative of Czechia, and the document will be adopted as orally revised. Now let's turn to L10 on detection and identification of living modified organisms, namely CBD, CP, MOP, 10, L10. Before reviewing this, I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat to provide us with information on the text.
Thank you, Chair. There's a correction on paragraph 3, and it should read, invites parties and relevant organizations to submit information on their experience with new detection techniques, comma. The language, new detection techniques, comma, is missing from the paragraph. If I may repeat, the paragraph will then read, invites parties and relevant organizations to submit information on their experience with new detection techniques, comma, detecting newly developed and unauthorized living modified organisms, comma, and developing reference materials, comma, as well as ongoing collaborations involving national and regional laboratories, and also invites, comma, in particular those that have not yet done so, comma, to submit information on their laboratories, comma, including their specific activities to the Biosafety Clearinghouse using the laboratory common format. Thank you, Chair.
I thank you. May I ask the delegates regarding the document and the proposed amendment by the Secretariat, is there any comment or objection? I have noted the representative of Colombia. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We appreciate the good spirit of the discussion that took place yesterday on this agenda item, and we thank the co-chairs for the good work on this basis. Chair, on paragraph 5, Colombia would kindly request to change the word especially for including. In that regard, the complete sentence would be read in particular for developing countries, including least developed countries and small island developing states and countries with economies in transition. We understand that we had a rich discussion in this paragraph and that several amendments were made. However, this word was not read in the final version of the paragraph. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
好，请秘书处做个回应。
I give the floor to the Secretariat.
The standard language for these phrases referring to the least developed countries is in particular, and indeed I believe that was the original language, but since we have in particular for developing countries, in particular, then there was an editorial change to replace the second in particular to especially, which was considered a synonym, but perhaps the most faithful words here would be in particular. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the Secretariat for the further explanation. Any other comment? If none, so this document is adopted. Now let's turn to L11 on review of effectiveness of structures and processes under the CBD and its protocols. CBD/CP/MOP/10/L11 for your review and adoption. And I also want to remind you that the document was already adopted by the working group in its review. Any further comments? If none, it's adopted. So now I announce that the meeting is adjourned. I now adjourn the meeting of the COP MOP 10 and resume the meeting of the COP MOP 4. We will now turn to the following documents or decisions, namely the L documents. They include the following: L3 on assets and benefit sharing, clearinghouse and information sharing, L4 on compliance with the protocol, L5 on measures to assist in capacity building and capacity development, L6 on monitoring and reporting, L7 on financial mechanism and resources, L8 on review of effectiveness of structures and processes under the CBD and its protocols. And now we will review them one by one. First, L3 on assets and benefit sharing, clearinghouse and information sharing. CBD/MP/MOP/4/L3. It was adopted by the working group. Are there any further comments? If none, it's adopted. Now let's review L4, the compliance and the protocol, CBD/M4/MOP/4/L4. I also want to remind you that the document was already adopted by the working group. Any further comments? If none, it's adopted. Now L5. Measures to assist in capacity building and capacity development, CBD/MP/MOP/4/L5 for your review and adoption. Similarly, the document was adopted by the working group. In its review, any further comments? I have noted the representative of the Philippines. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Philippines generally supports the draft decision on capacity building and development to support the effective implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. The Philippines is currently implementing a UNDP GEF-funded project on implementing the National Framework on Access and Benefit Sharing of Genetic Resources and Associated Traditional Knowledge in the Philippines. The Philippines is grateful for this support and would like to make a suggestion based on the lessons gathered from this project. In the draft decisions annex on priorities for continued capacity building to support the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, the Philippines would like to recommend an additional area for capacity building, which would be a new paragraph G, which would read development of tools and checklists that will integrate gender concerns in the various competency areas that will be covered by capacity building initiatives and activities, including the consideration of gender-responsive measures integrated within access and benefit sharing policies and measures. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
好，谢谢你。
Thank you for your proposal. In principle, we can take on board your proposal, subject to the objections by other parties. If not, I suggest that you read out again at a dictating speed what you have suggested so that we can take note of it.
So the paragraph G would read, development of tools and checklists that will integrate gender concerns in the various competency areas that will be covered by capacity building initiatives and activities, including the consideration of gender responsive measures integrated within access and benefit sharing policies and measures. Thank you.
好，谢谢。
Thank you. Any objections from the other parties?
如果没有，我们
If not, it is adopted.
现在我们
Now we turn to document L6, monitoring and reporting. That is CBD/MP/MOP/4/L.6 for your consideration and adoption. This document has been considered and adopted at the working group. Any more comments on this?
好，我注意到欧盟
I see European Union. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm speaking on behalf of the EU and its member states. We do support the adoption of the document. However, we have spotted a minor issue in paragraph 8. There was a new text added to this paragraph yesterday. We do support this addition. However, now it reads, reflect all articles of the Nagoya Protocol in the reporting format. Now, we believe that it should rather read all relevant articles of the Nagoya Protocol. The reason is that the protocol has altogether 36 articles. There are many who are indeed relevant for the implementation and should be reported on, but at the same time there are some articles that are rather relevant for the functioning and the organization of the protocol, such as the articles on the Secretariat, subsidiary bodies, or the Conference of the Parties. So our suggestion is to add the word relevant so that the last part would read all relevant articles of the Nagoya Protocol. We believe that this addition would be acceptable. Thank you, Mr. President.
好，
I thank you for your very good suggestion. On which, does anyone have any more comments on that proposal or the documents as a whole? If not, it's adopted. Now we turn our attention to document L7, entitled Financial Mechanism and Resources, contained in CBD/MP/MOP/4/L.7. I submit this document for your consideration and approval. Before we consider this document on financial mechanism and resources, I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat for further information on the amendment to the text. The Secretariat, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. With regard to document L7 on financial mechanism and resources, I would like to provide information on an amendment relating to the paragraph 1 of section B. Following the first reading of this agenda item and consideration of the CRP, this paragraph had been placed in brackets due to the ongoing negotiations under the COP on resource mobilization. In the EL document, the paragraph has been slightly edited to avoid prejudging the outcomes of COP15. It no longer refers to the decision on a new strategy for resource mobilization and rather refers more generally to the decision on resource mobilization. We hope that the amendment and explanation provided are agreeable to all and that the meeting can proceed with the adoption of the decision without brackets. Thank you, Chair.
好，谢谢。
Thank you, Secretariat. On this document and on the amendment mentioned by the Secretariat, any comments? If not, the document is adopted.
下面我们审
Now we will consider L8, that is the effectiveness of the structure of the CBD and the protocols contained in CBD/MP/MOP/4/L.8. I submit this document to your consideration and approval, which the document has been considered and approved at the working group level. I'm wondering if anyone has any new comments on this.
如果没有，我们
If not, the document is hereby adopted. Now, I would like to adjourn the COP-MOP4 on the Nagoya Protocol.
下面
I also resume the joint plenary of COP15, COP-MOP10, and COP-MOP4. Distinguished chairs, distinguished delegates, since the commencement of the COP on December the 7th,
之下，在两个
with the working groups and contact groups, the Friends of Chairs groups, under the leadership, all parties have engaged in negotiations.
会议的进程。
The parties also devoted themselves wholeheartedly to intensive consultations, and the shareholders participated fully in the proceedings. Now, after 3.5 days, remarkable progress has been made. We have just reviewed and approved a batch of actually 22 L documents accounting for over 1/3 of the resolutions to be adopted at this conference, including many important resolutions. Meanwhile, the framework text has also made major headway. We can say that this has greatly boosted our confidence and courage. In this connection, I once again thank the chairs of the 2 working groups and of the contact groups and the friends of the chairs, and once again express my appreciation and gratitude to all of you for your hard work, and my congratulations to everyone on the progress made. I have noticed that all the negotiators have been working hard day and night, hoping to reach the text we want. As we see it, our negotiations still face many challenging issues, such as the mobilization of financial resources, DSI, capacity building, and the question as to how the framework goals can strike a balance between ambition and pragmatism. We still need to pass more and harder resolutions. We still need to demonstrate a more cooperative spirit in tackling the priority items. We still need to send a clearer signal to reverse the trend of biodiversity loss, which is an urgent matter. But after working together at this stage, I also feel deeply your dedication, professionalism, humility, cooperation, and dedication, which have impressed me deeply. I believe that in the next week or so, we can accomplish more and do better. To this end, I call on all parties to do the following: show courage and fully demonstrate the greatest political will and sincerity, push for an ambitious, balanced, pragmatic, effective, strong, and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework, come up with wisdom, and with the greatest inclusiveness, show flexibility and meet each other halfway, clearly distinguish issues in terms of their difficulties and allot the proper time accordingly, heed the appeals for balancing the interests of all parties in addressing the agenda item for financial resources mobilization, and seek a bridging compromise solution in dealing with the DSI issue, show determination and make the decisions necessary to achieve common goals. I'm sure we will achieve our goals In view of the progress in our current negotiations, with the support of the Secretariat, I have consulted with the Bureau and the parties concerned and formulated a clear roadmap to advance the adoption of the framework and other key decisions by the conference. The roadmap classifies all topics according to their complexity and difficulty and divides the process into 4 stages. The first stage was from the opening of the conference to today, and the subsequent goalposts will be the 14th, the 17th, and the 19th. For each goalpost, clear goals for the stage are clearly defined with targeted measures to be taken, including leveraging the role of the high-level segment and Friends of Ministers, focusing on solving the problems of the stage concerned and ultimately promoting the achievement of all expected results at the conference. As I often say, one hero needs to be aided by 10. I share the same goal and direction with every one of you. As the president of the conference, I feel deeply everyone's trust in and support for me, and I also hope that everyone will sustain this trust and support as before. Let us join hands in braving the more difficult and complex challenges that lie ahead of us. I'm convinced that with your concerted efforts and firm belief towards the common goal, with your cooperative attitude and dedication, we will surely witness the smooth completion of the framework and the complete success of the conference, and bear witness to this historic moment of reversing the trend of biodiversity loss.
Now I will give the floor to the representatives from regions. If they have any comments, please make it now.
Okay.
I give the floor to the representative of Argentina. The floor is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, and we want to thank you for this opportunity to take stock on the progress made. I will address the plenary on behalf of GRULAC. We have already been for 10 days in Montreal, including the days of Working Group 5 and the days of COP. There is no much time left for us in this city. The time for compromise, for simplification, for bridging between different positions is now. GRULAC has been making compromises in the agenda items that are very important in the package of the GBF, such as planning, monitoring, reporting and review, and the monitoring framework. We know that these agenda items are very close to the heart of developed countries. We expect that this show of goodwill is reciprocated with a willingness by developed countries in moving forward the elements of the ambitious package of the GBF that are of utmost importance for developing countries, in particular DSI and resource mobilization. We have to say that we are a bit worried. Even if there is a positive spirit in discussions on resources and on DSI, there are still no tangible results. Therefore, GRULAC suggests to prioritize these items before the high-level segment. We need an in-depth discussion to agree on, first, the key elements that Target 19.1 will include. Second, a clear outline of the resource mobilization decision. And third, a clear proposal for a global solution on ABS on DSI. Identifying bridging solutions on these issues while accommodating the concerns of all parties will be critical to provide ministers with a way forward to finalize discussions. If we show, all of us, our goodwill on possible landing zones promptly, we will make the best use of the high-level segment and avoid arriving at the end of COP with uncertainty on the way forward. In a nutshell, Mr. President, to be able to unlock an ambitious GBF, we need to make progress on a global solution to DSI and on resource mobilization now. Thank you very much.
好，谢谢您的发言。
I thank you for your intervention.
好，下面我们请。
Now, I give the floor to the representative of Brazil. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is a group statement. I'm honored to speak on behalf of a broad coalition of like-minded developing countries on the issue of resource mobilization for biodiversity. This group includes the African group, Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Brazil, Bolivia, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Guatemala, Haiti, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Paraguay, the Philippines, and Venezuela. Our territories are home to most of the biological diversity in the world. We are leaders in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, and we are committed to continue as such in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. When COP15 agrees on an ambitious GBF, we will bear a higher burden than others in implementing it. That is why we wish to emphasize in the strongest terms possible that the adoption of the GBF at this COP must be accompanied by approval of a commensurately robust package on resource mobilization. In line with the principle of equity, it should ensure the provision of predictable, measurable, new, additional, and adequate financial resources from developed countries to developing countries. It should also ensure accessibility and proper monitoring of the financial commitments and pledges. Only a framework with clear targets and an architecture for resource mobilization and access can be considered to be an ambitious framework. Our group would like to recall the spirit of solidarity and cooperation that inspired us in 1992 and call for its renewal. The Rio principles are as relevant today as ever. We agree that the implementation of the GBF will require additional funds from all sources. DSI has a role to play in this regard. At the same time, the resources mobilized from the private sector cannot be conflated with the legal obligations contained in Articles 20 and 21 of the CBD. Our group sees merit in the idea of a resource mobilization strategy that would contain two steps, as suggested by the co-chairs of the contact group. But let us be clear, the first two-year step of this strategy needs to be incremental and contain pathways to reach tangible outcomes that will allow us to move effectively and immediately in implementing the GBF. It is time to fulfill a mandate as old as our convention and establish a funding mechanism that is dedicated exclusively to biodiversity, complementing the resource mobilization landscape. This would be a second-generation fund in the sense that it would draw on lessons learned from the successes and limitations of existing instruments, with the view to ensure timely, direct, and needs-based access by developing countries, making the CDB future ready. Emulating the historic decision taken just a few weeks ago at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh to establish a fund on loss and damage, COP15 can also decide to take this important step and set up a process to detail the modalities and structure of the new instrument to be concluded by COP16. In the meantime and beyond, the GEF would continue to fulfill its valuable role in financing many environmental issues, including biodiversity. it will remain necessary to address the issues of efficiency, access, and scale in the GEF and other existing multilateral financial institutions and instruments, including with the view to ensure that they are responsive to the GBF. The scale of resources that will be required to implement the GBF makes it clear that the existing multilateral sources are not up to this task. It is crucial to include a clear figure, a number under target 19.1 of the GBF. We recall that our group has proposed that developed countries commit to mobilize and jointly provide financial grants of at least $100 billion a year annually, or 1% of global GDP until 2030, an amount to be revised for the period 2030 to 2050. These resources should be new and additional to those already being provided under other MEAs. The mechanism for reporting, review, and planning must include modalities for the reporting by all countries on biodiversity finance and other support that they are committing, including reporting by developed countries on what they have provided to developing countries. Such information should also be considered integral to the review of progress in implementing the GBF, the modalities and processes of which are still under discussion, to provide a greater level of transparency and enable us to meet the implementation needs on the basis also of financial resources provided under Article 20. Our group will continue to engage constructively in the days ahead. We all want a successful COP, and we will continue to uphold that for this COP to be a success, solidarity and equity should be or remain overarching principles in our work. Decisions on adequate and accessible resource mobilization must be central to the package of outcomes to be adopted, along with the long overdue acknowledgement that DSI is covered by the access and benefit sharing provisions of the CBD. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank you for your statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the EU. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states to say that we are encouraged by the constructive and friendly way we have engaged on all sides in the work of the Conference of the Parties till now. We have seen this afternoon the adoption of a large number of L documents, which is a testimony to the will of all parties of the instruments under the CBD, be it the CBD, the Cartagena Protocol and the Nagoya Protocol, to move forward in maintaining, creating and strengthening the framework that we have. We're also encouraged by the good progress that is being made in the discussions around all the elements that will constitute an ambitious and transformative global biodiversity framework, complemented and completed by a robust implementation framework for the monitoring, planning, reporting and review, as well as the package for the mobilization of resources. We're also glad to see that advances and progress is being made in identifying elements of a solution for the sharing of benefits from the use of digital sequence information. In order to continue our work, we will need to focus on all elements of the future framework on the same level of priority if we are to finish our work in time that we have at our disposal. We are looking forward to working with you and with the other parties in view of completing all elements of this framework, and looking forward to taking stock of our progress at the next occasion as outlined by you on the 14th of December. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you very much for your statement. I now give the floor to Honduras.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. The delegation of Honduras echoes the statement delivered by the representative of Brazil. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Colombia.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. I have the honor to make this statement on behalf of Chile, Costa Rica, Mexico, Peru, and Colombia. First of all, we would like to align this statement with that of the distinguished delegate of Argentina on behalf of GRULAC. Our countries have come to this Conference of the Parties with the strong desire to achieve an ambitious agreement which is transformative, measurable, and effective, as reflected by the post-2020 Global Framework for Biodiversity, which we will deliver for the world. The purpose bringing us together is that this proposes concrete and effective solutions to the loss of biodiversity, which has set our planet on a path of no return. To ensure that these agreements lead to effective and wide-scale delivery, we need for this to be in line with the transformations we are seeing. We agree with the prior statements about the fact that we need to have an incremental or gradual financial framework with the means that we have at our disposal. First of all, we must begin with the immediate implementation of the framework. On the other hand, we must make progress in a sustainable, progressive, predictable, and sufficient fashion so that we attain our goals and objectives. After participating actively in discussions of the contact group on resource mobilization and having heard the interventions from various delegations here in the room today, we are convinced of the fact that there is not a single response to the complex challenges linked to availability, predictability, and access to resources. A robust, comprehensive package is required which factors in the concerns of all parties. Chair, this package must include the mobilization of new and additional resources from all sources, including official development assistance, with a renewed commitment from developed countries who have come to announce important contributions, which are, however, still insufficient for the implementation of the ambitious GBF which we all desire. Because of this, all parties must allocate resources, including additional resources, to the implementation of the framework. We must work decisively on integrating and mainstreaming biodiversity at all levels of government and in all productive sectors, as this is sure to contribute to the efficient use of resources. Similarly, progress must be made towards the elimination of subsidies and incentives which are adverse to biodiversity in line with existing multilateral rules. Furthermore, promoting and extending the network of positive incentives is required, as is regulating and stepping up all financial flows linked to caring for nature. This comprehensive approach to resource management should be bolstered by a decision to engage in a reform of the Global Environment Facility, or GEF, thus maximizing its utility for the implementation of the new framework. This reform must include at least a process independent of GEFs 8 and 9, which should be dedicated exclusively to the implementation of the framework. The new GBF replenishment should open the door to the new and additional resources from all funds, with institutional arrangements guaranteeing joint and active work with multilateral development banks and international financial organizations. They should provide dedicated portfolios for investment in this process in a complementary fashion. As we make progress with the reform of the Global Framework for the Environment Facility, we acknowledge the value of the proposals placed upon the table to have a fund dedicated solely to the CBD itself. We believe that this conversation should continue and that the global framework should involve an intergovernmental process with a view to taking a final decision about its financial mechanism. Sir, We need progress towards a global solution for resource mobilization, and we need it now. It is fundamental that delegations make their positions more flexible, presenting compromise positions for the consideration of the high-level segment. I thank you very much.
I thank you for your remarks. I now give the floor to the representative of New Zealand. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I take the floor on behalf of JustCans. We are now at day 4 of this COP. We've been pleased to see some progress in removing some brackets on the global biodiversity framework. We are reminded about why we are here, why this framework matters. Because we are in the midst of a biodiversity crisis, witnessing the loss of irreplaceable species and spaces. So, while there has been progress, we also have a lot of work ahead of us, and we acknowledge the Presidency's call on all parties to focus all of our efforts on removing brackets, so that when ministers arrive, we give them a recommendation that addresses the urgency to act, and that a recommendation that they can work with. The world is watching us and expecting us to deliver an ambitious global biodiversity framework that sets us on the path to halting and reversing biodiversity loss. Our Indigenous partners remind us that we must make decisions with the future of 7 generations in mind. With this guiding us, we are committed to work with parties to find solutions and arrive at texts that we can be proud to put to ministers on December the 15th. Mr. President, JustCans has engaged constructively in the negotiations, always with the goal to find good compromises that help us to achieve our overall objective: a strengthened international framework to protect and sustainably use biodiversity and ensure fair benefit sharing. We're working towards a global biodiversity framework that includes headline indicators and planning, reporting and review. We agree that resources are critical and will be part of the solution found here in Montreal. We believe that all that have the capacity must support those who need support. We believe that we have to find not only ways to increase significantly the amount of means available, but also access, especially for the poorest and those who need most support. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you for your statement. I would like to see if any representative of the African region would like to take the floor. Additionally, I would also like to see if there's any representative from the Central and Eastern European region that would like to take the floor. If not, I thank those who spoke earlier. I thank you for your remarks. You have wonderfully summarized what we have done so far. We now come to the end of the session. Before we leave, I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat for any announcements. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Just to remind that there will be some friends groups meeting shortly, beginning 6 o'clock and 6:15, and then some contact groups and other friends groups at 7:30. Please check the online schedule or the monitors for the information, but this includes at 6 o'clock the contact group on 9A's friends group for informal consultations on Target 1. Also at 6:15, the friends group on agenda item 13. and at 7:30, contact group on GBF, looking at targets 3 onwards. Also at 7:30, contact group on agenda item 20, marine and coastal biodiversity, and a Friends of the Chair group on agenda item 11, DSI, and a contact group on agenda item 15, IPBES. Also to note that Canada, our host, is hosting a reception this evening I believe it is on the 7th floor and on the 1st floor. And this is open to all delegates. All delegates are invited to this reception. And just to note that on the conclusion of this plenary, there will be a short video showing the prize winners in the for the Midori Prize. And it was also shown earlier, but I think many delegates may have missed it. There will also be, of course, over the weekend, it's not really the weekend, over Sunday and Monday, a number of parallel events taking place in the venue, as well as others off-site. Please check the website for these events. I should also note that there will be some contact groups or Friends of the Chair groups meeting on Monday. Please check the online schedule for that information. That will be updated later this evening. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Secretariat, for the information shared with us. I thank you all for your good spirit during the deliberation that took place this week. Tomorrow and on Monday, as was indicated by the Secretariat, there will be a number of COP-associated events, including parallel events. I encourage delegations to participate in these events as far as possible. I also suggest to delegations that over the course of the next 2 days, perhaps you could rest well, because we indeed worked very hard. Many people worked late into the night. Many contact groups held meetings sometimes into the early morning hours the next day. We need to rest well and recharge so that we can be refreshed to continue our work in next week. The next plenary will take place on the 17th of December, which is a Saturday. It is to be held immediately following the conclusion of the high-level segment. At that plenary meeting, we will review the working groups and of the budget contact groups' work. I urge delegations to show greater spirit of a broader inclusivity so that the working groups and the contact groups can complete their work before the stockholdings plenary next time, so that if necessary, for the last few hours or the last few days, we can focus our attention on key outstanding issues. The Secretariat also reminded delegations that our host, Canada, is offering a reception this evening. This is to commence at 6:30 this evening, and it is open to all delegations. We thank Canada for the reception. I now declare the joint plenary is now adjourned. Thank you very much.
好，谢谢。好，谢谢，我们请。